Namaste, namaste, everybody who's tuning in. We have the most remarkable gentleman sitting before us this evening, and I just want to introduce William to you. And I know that this is going to be a really exciting journey, this deep dialogue. For so those of you who are fresh and new to this, it is what it sounds like. It's a deep dialogue. And so William won't be presenting. He's going to be having a conversation with me. And you'll see that even when he's in mid-flow, I will perceive one tasty bit that I want us to emphasize or draw out. So I will possibly interrupt him, but we've already had a wonderful pre-show conversation. So it's not going to be ungracious. Of course, it's not going to be invasive, but it is going to be me. I suppose a word that springs to my mind is just being gently interrogatory so that we get into the real muscle and bone and essence and soul of what this wonderful gentleman does. So William Peters is sitting before us. William is a recognized world authority on the essence of the shared death experience, having developed a research base that classifies the full range of what he refers to as SDEs. And of course, we can pick that up when we talk because we know about NDEs. But this field of specialism, I feel intrinsically, is something very, very extraordinary. So this full range of SDEs. And William also created the spectrum of end-of-life experiences, which is a user-friendly guide to assist the dying, the caregivers, and all the healthcare professionals, and presumably also the dear ones who have gathered around the bed of the dying one. And this wonderful manual provides navigation and understanding of the entire phenomena that manifests at the end of life. William is the founder of the Shared Crossing Project, and as a licensed MFT therapist, which he may tell us about, because I don't really know what that stands for. William holds an MA in counseling from the California Institute of Integral Studies and an MED, in Master of Education, in Group Dynamics from Harvard. And I guess his first graduacy was a BA in political economy from the University of California. So obviously California is your state of residence. Apart from that one little sojourn over to the East Coast to Harvard when you were going through all of that extraordinary training and graduacy. So William, where did it all start, the SDE phenomenon for you?
Well, I think it pretty much began at 17 years old. I had a near-death experience in a high-speed skiing accident. And if you can imagine, I was really just a normal, well, semi-normal. If there's such thing as a normal adolescent, I was one of them in, a suburban, upper middle class neighborhood in Northern California, what is now Silicon Valley. And we would ski a lot in the weekends. And I was just up there over the holidays and took a really bad fall and fractured my spine, my low spine, my lumbar area. And at the moment of impact, everything went dark, but I had an awareness that everything went dark. Like at that moment, as I look back on that, I realized, there was an observing self there, consciousness, soul, spirit, however you want to language it. I realized that I was out of my body. I was in darkness, and soon the lights came back on, and I was looking down at my body on the ski slope, and I was moving rapidly away, ascending, and really enamored by what I was viewing. It was at Lake Tahoe area, which is gorgeous. And so I saw the lake, I saw the beautiful Sierra Nevadas. Soon I was far enough to see, oh my gosh, there's San Francisco Bay, and there's Colorado Rockies, and there's continental United States or North America. And then our beautiful planet, Earth. And then as that was going on, and I'm getting further and further away, I'm now looking at a beautiful solar system, hyper alive. And I'm also realizing a life review for the first 17 years of my life is occurring. And I'm realizing that everything I had thought, said, or done was recorded and being played back to me. And it was a real lesson in karma, like everything matters. Soon I'm in this tunnel, and it's interesting because it's kind of slinky-like, but it's got a white film around it. I'm looking through that film at a universe that's kind of humming by, and like meteors and movements of different planets and what have you. It's all exciting. And then I see this pinprick of light in the distance that starts getting bigger, and I realize I'm dying. And I've been here before. It's interesting, as I recount that to you, I notice my language is I'm dying, but really the language should be I'm dead, but I'm not, and so I realize actually what I said the first time is I'm dying. That is what I related to. I said, I'm dying. And then I start pleading with this light, which I grew up Catholic. So that light to me is God. And I'm saying, God, don't let me die. I have not completed what I came into this lifetime to complete, not knowing anything about what my mission or purpose or that lifetime was about. I had no idea. But I said those words, so there was some part of me that knew there's a purpose to a human life, and mine had a purpose that I had not touched into yet. So I eventually went fully into that light, and it was absolutely sublime. And I was so comfortable. My pleading to return to my human life ceased. And I was at peace. I remember myself saying, I'm good. I don't need to go back. And then all of a sudden I felt a push on my body. And when I say body, I use that very loosely because I didn't really see anything physical at all. It was just a push on my, whatever I would call my conscious self. There was a push on it, and it moved out of that light. And I started heading back very slowly to planet Earth. I knew I was heading back because he said to me telepathically, make something of your life. And that really struck me as an incomprehensible transmission, if you will. And at that point, I was now focused on getting back to planet Earth, looking like on how am I going to get back? I'm doing this trip in reverse, but I'm falsely thinking I have some control over this. Like I think I'm driving this bus, and I'm not. It took me a while to realize, I'm worried about how I'm going to get back to my body, and I'm not really recognizing that I'm actually being pulled back. So I eventually let go. I see planet Earth in the distance, soon continental North America, Colorado Rockies, Lake Tahoe. I actually wonder, how am I going to get into that body? And boom, I'm back in my body. I feel the coldness of the ski slope, and my friend John comes up to me and sprays me with powder snow, and I'm back in my body, and that experience is gone.
Yeah. And then excruciating pain.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up, because I realized when I was on the ski slope, the first thing I realized is I'm cold, but I have no feeling in my body. And I pled with God, don't let me be paralyzed, because I knew it was a bad wipeout. And so the feeling came back into my body. And, what I wish I had asked God for at that point was, please heal my body, because I lived the subsequent 30 plus years in severe chronic back pain. Severe, like difficulty sitting, difficulty walking. I look pretty good today, but I'm having trouble walking even now. So it's been a tough road physically and emotionally from that injury. But this, of course, is a response to your question, how did I get into this? And the near-death experience, that first near-death experience, which, as your viewers probably know, that's a pretty classic near-death experience. It has some of the major elements in it. At that time, and not for another decade, would I even know that that is what I experienced. But it changed me. Not just the pain, but I had a whole reshuffling of my values, what matters. I found myself working in Central and South America soon after graduation, which would have been, my years 23, 24, 25, 26. And there I was introduced to shamanistic cultures, and both in Guatemala and particularly in Peru, where I worked with refugees from a really brutal civil war in the 80s. And I learned not so much through direct conversation or teaching, put it that way. It was really through conversation, but not direct conversation. Like I wasn't with a shaman or a particular teacher, but I was ensconced in a culture of the Aymara indigenous people from southern Peru and Bolivia, and mostly work with the kids and heard the kids talk about their cosmology and what the shaman said and what the elders said. And yes, over time I got to listen to the elders, but I never like went on a specific journey with them in any way, as you see, modern people go to these parts of Latin America to go on spiritual journeys of sorts. Mine was entirely through cultural osmosis and the language around death and dying. There was a lot of death and dying, so I heard a lot of conversations. I would comfort people as best I could, but through that I would be honestly corrected or heard different expressions of what their grief, their beliefs were about. And it fit very well with what I experienced in my near-death experience. So for me, there was no cognitive dissonance in a sense that after a human death, you go on, whatever that you is, that there is another life, that there is a liberation from the physical human body, and that these realms subsequent to this one we are now sharing is far more benevolent and loving, at least the initial stages. So that's how I got into this.
Wow, amazing. So there are two small observations that I'd love to sort of dig into, because I've had a number of NDE people, including Eben Alexander, whose story I was very impressed by because of his role within the patriarchal system, and then how the sickness, we'll leave it there, challenged his body to such a degree that he moved into major coma, and then, as we know, he was about to die. But his son, as it were, awoke him, and he came back. Obviously, his brain was mush because of the terrible virus that he was experiencing, but eventually he pieced himself back together, I'm sure with a lot of therapeutic help. But I haven't heard anybody speak of the macro experience in the way that you do with such lucidity, and that's evidently to do very much with the vibrational aspect of your consciousness, that you're able to take a very broad view, just as you were leaving your body and going through all of the varying stages. And obviously, in your 17-year-old experience, you knew the topography of the land very well, and there you were suddenly moving through the universe and moving into that transcendental experience. But then, so I find that quite fascinating as a point of observation. But the second feature that I wanted to question was, when you came back, and forgive me that I'll probably paraphrase what you were asked, but go back and make good purpose of your life. Were you given any inkling about what you would do? Or did you have a sensation of what could possibly be purpose?
None whatsoever. That purpose would not emerge until, well, now let me look back at this, until 2009. So that would now be 16 years ago.
Okay.
And that happened because I was living and working with a super healer, in Brazil, a spiritist, and spiritists have a very fluent relationship with their ancestors. So they're in constant communication with deceased relatives. And this fit for me only because I didn't have any resistance to it. I realized from my near-death experience, and I had another near-death experience, and then I had other I started having shared-death experiences when I worked in hospice,
Right.
In the early 2000 through 2001, 2, 3, but anyway, so I started realizing that there's definitely more after this, and there are beings that come and greet us, often deceased relatives, as we transition. They kind of form a welcoming party, if you will. So here again, going back, I'm very comfortable with this in Brazil, this notion that we survive death, that we can be in relationship with our deceased relatives and elevated spirit beings and what have you. And after 2 years living in a community, meditating as we do in these communities for sometimes 6 hours a day, and working to support the healer and the hundreds of people that come for healings of different types, physical mostly, but also spiritual, emotional. I on my last stay there, I was living there, but on my last kind of interaction with the kind of leader, chief medium there, as we call him, as a channel, I said, I'm going to be leaving, and I'm hoping that I can have meaningful work when I return to my home country. I was a psychotherapist. You asked what MFT stands for, marriage and family therapist, psychotherapist. So I was a trained psychotherapist, and as I was going to return, I remember the medium, we call him the entity, because when he's working, he's not a human being, he's the spirit working through him. And he said, his eyes got really big, energy moved through him, and I was kind of pushed back. He goes, "Oh, you will have wonderful work, and it will find you." And when he said that, that was the connection. It was interesting how the pieces kind of connected then, from the 17-year-old boy in the near-death experience who heard, make something of your life, to this spiritual power telling me, now's the time. Your work will find you. And keep in mind, this is 2009 now, and I am 47 years old. So not an old man, but not a young man either. And so that's the time when I realized what my work was, but I still didn't know what it was. But as I returned home, it was a mere 7 months later, I was at a conference. I met Raymond Moody, the grandfather of the near-death experience. Yeah. And I'll share this because it's a very poignant experience. I'm there because I want to meet Raymond Moody, because I've had 2, near-death experiences. And he starts out his talk by saying, I know most of you are here to hear me talk about the near-death experience. He says, but I'm going to talk about something else that's actually far more relevant and available to every single one of you. And you don't have to risk your own life to experience it. It's called the shared death experience. It is identical to the near-death experience in terms of phenomena and features, but it happens when you are a caregiver or loved one, and in some cases just a bystander, and somebody dies, and you either witness or accompany the dying into the initial stages of the afterlife. And what you experience is similar, if not identical, to the near-death experience. When he said that, my body just lit up. I mean, like the energy, the hair stood up on my body. And I realized in that moment, the NDE experience from God, if you will, make something of your life, from the powerful entity in Brazil who said, your work will find you and it will be good. And then this moment right here, I said, this is it.
Yeah.
This is it.
You see, there's a moment of inspiration of why I wanted to refer to the context of the macro experience, because just reading that intuitively, it feels that you have this beautiful ability to your consciousness to form, as it were, an umbrella so that you can perceive what the micro is all about. Except how do we compute all of that information in the lives that we've been engendered to experience, and then have chosen whatever we've chosen, like your 17-year-old who was just really interested in skiing and and presumably finding beautiful girls and what blah 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 blah. But how suddenly in that moment, particularly with the master teacher like Raymond, that all the pieces started to, as it were, biochemically move into a purpose that thrilled you, and evidently therefore neural chemicals were released completely within your body to provide a complete synthesis of an understanding, so you knew where to begin. And how did that feel when you suddenly arrived at that point, when Raymond said that and you've experienced that knowing?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I was on crutches and in a good deal of pain. So I remember crutching up to Raymond from behind a group of maybe a couple hundred people. And Raymond, being a compassionate man that he is, took sympathy and said, you know, wow, you came all the way up here, you know, crutched up. And then we had a conversation. And and I told him, you know, as a hospice worker, I've had many of these shared death experiences. And I said, is there anyone doing research? He goes, not that I'm aware of. And I said, I not only do I know about these experiences, I actually think I know how to facilitate them. Mm. And his eyes got big and he said, well, that's wonderful. He says, because, you know, we need to learn more about this. And I said, well, I would like to research it. And he goes, well, that's wonderful. And he says, let me know how I can help. So that began a relationship with Raymond. And I just talked to Raymond, I mean, literally just last week, you know, so, and he's quite old now. He's not doing as much publicly as he used to. But you asked, how did that feel in that moment? Pardon me?
How did it feel?
Yeah, I mean, the feeling was like elation, but also like a bit of confusion about like, how is this all going to happen? I mean, I think that's where the ego steps in and says, great, you know, you've got this great euphoric experience, like you have your life's work. The ego steps in and says, well, now how are you going to figure this out? You know, and what I have realized subsequent to that awakening is that, you know, I worked really hard. I think, you know, there's that old saying, you know, 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration. And I've definitely lived that. And I've definitely, you know, doing the research and presenting around the world and, you know, writing books and now doing a feature film on this. It's a lot of work. But when I look back on it, I realize, oh, I got a lot of help, and I continue to get a tremendous amount of help. And I think that comes from these higher powers that are guiding, supporting, bringing people together in very mutually beneficial ways. And, you know, obviously my work is at end of life. And so when people call me, they want help with the most painful experience. And I'm fortunate that I'm often able to, you know, help them have a shared death experience or process one that they've already had and integrate it into their understanding of who we truly are. So, yes, I was inspired for sure in 2009 meeting Raymond. I think as I've grown more mature in my path, I realize it's really less and less about me and my mission and my purpose, and more about being part of a loving consciousness that is wanting to bring more of what I have learned or been gifted with to others in whatever way that I can be used for that.
So I'd just like to unpack some of that, because at the moment, I'm sure you're meeting it as well, there's a big conversation in most people's consciousnesses, which is because there are so many people who are waking up. The veils are parting in simplicity. And so we're beginning to wake up, and automatically compassion and empathy, sympathetic magic within us, wants us to align with a particular assignment. And so, of course, we have the dreaded word, what's my purpose? Because after all, we've all been indoctrinated, educated, socialized into, what do you want to be when you grow up? Which is the most stupid question to ask any 14 or 15-year-old. I don't know. I mean, some of us do know. I knew I wanted to be an actor, but of course, that was, my father was very anti as far as that was concerned, because he saw it as being an idle misuse of time. And most of the profession are unemployed at any moment of time, and a lot of them are queer. You know, I mean, that was his attitude, which is just so ridiculous. But that was a long time ago, a long time. And we're going back into the late 50s, early 60s. However, this idea of purpose, people come to me and they're fixated about purpose. And what's beautiful about your story is that it came to you. When we're ready, it comes. Now, at the same time, there are many other integers which are, you were using your time purposefully. And there was this, am I striving or am I thriving? That's another aspect of the conversation of what is my purpose. Because it feels to me that our purpose is to optimize our creativity full of love and joy. That's the, so the universe says, what do you want to do? Well, it dawned on you what you wanted to do, and something thrilled within the whole of your body. So you knew, there was a state of primal knowing that this feels really good. And it was also being acknowledged by an elder in the form of Raymond. And then, of course, we get caught up in the how, because we've been educated into quantification. So how am I going to do this? How am I going to do it? And actually the universe says, how old do you think I am? And how old are you? Okay, now who knows better? Okay, lean into me. Don't worry about the how. All you need to know is why.
Yeah.
And the why is because it makes me feel good, because I have a sense of well-being, because it gives me a great sense of joy and delight. And then the magic and the miracle of the universe starts taking place. It feels like the quantification, as it were, not quite the right word, but the qualitative aspect of your journey was all about getting the ducks to line up. That's one metaphor, just every single aspect of the awakening, which for you initially, obviously, was developing a cognitive clarity about how you could offer service in the field of psychotherapy. Now, when you move into the transcendental experience of death with others, so I really mean there you are as the doula, as the caregiver, as the lover, as the helper, as the transcendent channel of what this experience could be about. How does that feel in presence of that sanctified moment where everything goes still in death when they're about to pass? How does that feel?
Well, I can tell by the way that you've described it that you've been there. And I find being at the bedside when somebody is dying, and I do say being at the bedside because there are different types of deaths. Sudden deaths when you're at an automobile accident, or that's very different than the more modern type death where people die more slowly now, and with the support of medical support and what have you. So there's an intentionality that we can bring to it. And for me, that intentionality, greatly informed by my work at Zen Hospice in San Francisco, now 25 years ago, is really bringing in presence, just just bring yourself, all of yourself, into that moment with, quite frankly, nothing to really do except, if you want to say it this way, be fully there. And the mantras that I use, if you will, and as guide points, is something to this effect is like, how can I be useful? And I actually ask, I look at the person who's dying and I talk to them. I talk to their higher self, to their guides, ask my guides, if you will, because one of the things I notice when I'm at these deathbed vigils, if you will, is that the room gets full. In other words, it gets thick with, some might call it energy. I think that's part of it. But I really feel the presence of other beings. And I try to align myself with them. Like I'm actually, it's so emotional for me. I feel my heart starts opening because I feel the relationship with them. And it's just like, and I can say like, you again. Here we are at another death. You are here again. This is what death is about. The split, the opening in the veil, where the two dimensions, one being the human earth dimension and the other being what we'll loosely call the afterlife, they meet in this moment of fullness, of deep knowing and clarity that is, we are right where we need to be. We are being and doing exactly what we need to be doing and being. And it's not really much from a measurement of modern production and productivity. It's just being open-hearted, present, loving, compassionate, and receptive. And
But that of course, I mean, you make it sound quite slight, but that's a devotional discipline in itself. And I feel that all of your prior experience of working with remarkable intercessionarily people, such as the channels in South America, that was all a preparation for moving into the stillness.
Yeah.
It manifests itself in our lives in so many different ways. I mean, as a young man, I remember I told you the story earlier that one of my first big clients was Margaret Thatcher. So the night before I went into Downing Street, I was literally wetting myself with nerves, and I was trying to formulate, well, what should I say? What should I say? And I said to my partner, I'm really, really nervous. I think he observed that I was also, in a state. So I said, I'm really, really nervous. What should I say? And he just looked at me in a slightly withering sense and said, why don't you just listen? So again, it's going back into this fixation that we have with doing, and that if we can move into the presence of absolute stillness, which really means that we become not self-conscious, but self-aware of our perceptual faculties open. We move into this divine stillness, which is really what the musculature of meditation is all about, so that we can receive, we can hear, we can see, we can smell, we can taste, we can feel, and we receive, as you so beautifully put, what is my next action of service? Of what purpose can I be put? I feel that that's very remarkable, do you see? Because that's a key and a door into the preternatural, isn't it? And therefore, the holy ones come in. The unseen ones come in.
Yes. There's a verb that I use. It's attune. Just attune, and it's really, how do we use our bodies, everything in our bodies? The frequency is the most important, and I think we identify as a physical body with feelings and emotions and sensations, but in that veil, when that veil opens, and by the way, it opens for a while. It is not like just a moment of death. I mean, I'll take a moment and say it was Peter Fenwick, who's a great, medical doctor and really very spiritually oriented man, who did one of the greatest studies on care. I think in Great Britain, you call them carers. In the United States and North America, we call them caregivers. But his study was on carers. And what he found in interviewing, many, many hundreds of carers, is that death is not a moment in time. It is not a moment in time. We always so-and-so died at 6:52, put it in the record, as if that has some particular significance. The fact of the matter is, for slow deaths, which, as I said earlier, these are gradual. And like I said, Peter had said that there's a titration that's going on, that the soul, spirit, consciousness is doing. It's leaving its physical human body, going into the next dimension, maybe going other places, coming back. And we have this opportunity to attune to that and everything that is happening around that. In other words, the conversations, the encounters that this spirit is having with those elevated beings, with those deceased relatives. I can't tell you that every time I can sense and feel who they are and what's names and all this and significance. I can tell you that when I attune, I sense and feel these presences, and I have an emotional response to them. I often weep, my heart opens, and I say thank you. It comes out naturally. There's an inherent divinity in these encounters that only happen, and I dare say this, they only happen when we can slow down enough as caregiver loved ones to allow ourselves to be taken into this experience and use ourselves as an instrument of care and support, but more about being care, being support, not about doing anything. There are people, hopefully, in your hospice team, if that's the situation you're in, that are taking care of that. Because what I tell family members and loved ones who are with their dying, relations, have pros do that so you can go, as you said earlier, Stewart, so you can be still and fully present to this moment. Because if you can do that, you open the kingdom of possibility in what you can experience and feel and learn, because the knowledge that is provided through transmission in that moment is spectacular. And you don't even know how you got it. But when I have this feeling, but I can tell you in our research, hundreds of people say, I don't know what happened there. And I have an experience and I can tell you about it. But I knew the answers to everything. I knew the purpose of a human life. I knew where we're going next. I knew why a human existence even happens. Not just for me, but for the purpose of humanity and creation. So there is so much available to us as this veil opens. And I think that's, if I can advocate for anything, it's that. Open to the mystery available in that mystical moment.
And I'm sure your guidebook that I referred to in your bio is packed full of this really, really useful, practical information that you've identified through the experiential. I want to read it, because I'm finding what you're saying absolutely fascinating. And from my own experience of the dying, and also of the metaphysical aspect of the supernatural space that is opening in this hallowed space of the dear one preparing to pass through, that we talked about the stillness, but we've also talked about the otherworldliness, where a multidimensionality happens and we become multi-perceptual. Because, apropos your story, whomever it was said, I knew the answer to every single question, and then it disappeared. So we're in this extraordinary space of the liminal, that meeting point between the worlds, the seen and the unseen worlds, which is packed full of information. But all the time you're sharing with us this nature of what it is to be present. And one of the singular features of presence is at utter stillness, to get really quiet in the busyness of the mind, trusting that the earthly team, meaning the hospice caregivers, are doing their job and doing it expertly. Because my experience of hospice caregivers is that the level of compassion, the level of simplicity, the level of kindness and heart-centered care, always, I've had a number of Marie Curie nurses as clients of mine over the years, and these women touch me so deeply that I end up weeping with them in the session as they share the wonder of what the experiences are and the honor that they feel in serving in that way. That we begin to really recognize that there's something very powerful about the nature of what you're sharing with us and how we can relate it to our living lives as well as our dying lives, and how life continues. Wow. I mean, so many questions come to my mind. What else can you tell us?
Well, I mean, I should probably say a little bit about the shared death experience. Like, what is it really?
Yeah.
Because
you pioneered this project, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Raymond was inspirational because he had, because I don't feel many people know about SDE.
No. And in fact, this is something that Raymond and I have discussed various times because, and we're both baffled by it. I mean, I think it's fair to say that, Raymond and I are, the two most knowledgeable about the SDE just in terms of our research. And so we have always wondered, after he wrote a great book in 2009 called Glimpses of Eternity, and he has, I think, a few dozen spectacular stories. They're all bedside SDEs. Mm-hmm. And then I started a research project, and we've collected now, many hundreds, well over 500 cases, deeply interviewed and assessed, created a coding tree, which is what we do as researchers. And we've got 70 some odd elements that we look for, features. So we know what the SDE is phenomenologically, but our SDEs, over 2/3 of them are remote. You don't need to be at bedside to have this most mystical experience. Now, I want to say something about this quite directly, because when you have a remote SDE, that means you could be down the hall, next bedroom over, across town, or on the other side of the world. But let's just imagine someone's dying in Great Britain, and here I am in Santa Barbara. I'm going about my life, and all of a sudden, I have this kind of haze come over me, and I'm still preparing lunch, let's say. But I'm all of a sudden realizing that I'm seeing Martha in Great Britain, and she's in another dimension, and I'm looking at her, and I'm saying, Martha, and she acknowledges me, not through words, just telepathically. And maybe she'll tell me something like, come with me, or maybe she'll be something like nothing really other than I'm there and I'm with her, and she's not going to say anything, but I'm learning so quickly. I'm so enamored. I'm not going anywhere. Then you see deceased relatives come that I may or may not recognize, but I know that she recognizes them. They embrace as spirits do. And then there's an elevated being out there to the somewhere usually above. And I'm realizing that being has a purpose. It seems to be in charge. I have now identified that being as the conductor, and we have seen the conductor, many, many dozens of times now in different forms. But it seems to be this powerful spirit that is in charge of transitioning a soul, spirit, consciousness from a human being at the moment of death, out of that human body into this afterlife dimension. And then all of a sudden, I'm there with Martha, and I'm seeing her life review. So here, my friend Martha, and now I'm realizing, now, of course, I've had a lot of these experiences, but if you're new at this, you're just like, oh my, what is this? And by the way,
so you've said that phrase several times. So what is this? I mean, from a phenomenological point of view, from a metaphysical point of view, because you've journeyed into the field of metaphysics so wonderfully and bountifully over the years. So what is it?
What is the experience, or what?
What is this? That
yeah. I mean, I think this is the continuation of consciousness into its next dimension, and it is evidence that death is an illusion, that we at least survive human death. It certainly feels like we're eternal, because all these beings that are coming down are alive and doing something, and
they're endorsing, aren't they, the eternality of spirit.
They are, and there's something about the vastness in this that is like, oh, I mean, this is where you learn the awe, like or oh wow, you get where these guttural sounds come from when you're looking at the awesomeness of this. It is not just stunning, but it is also familiar. Like
I speak of it as being the field of wonder.
Yes, of wonder,
which is full of multidimensional possibilities. I mean, the possibilities are infinite.
Yes.
And actually, I feel that part of the gift of what you're bringing to us, apart from the remarkable work that you're dealing with the mortality of someone as they transfer into eternality, is that you're reminding us of this interconnectivity between the seeming living and the other realm, which of course we know is not a place but a frequency.
Yes.
Where we have this interconnection, and one of the keys, or one of the linchpins, or one of the codes, if we use a bioidentity security check, is wonder.
Is wonder, openness,
absolute openness. But you see, we can only be truly in wonder if we're connecting with our innocence, because all children find wonder if they're not tainted by violence or trauma or adulteration on some level. They all, wow. I spent the first 6 years of my life in a perpetual state of wonder, because I was in touch with the multidimensional universe and seeing the angels and seeing dead people. I was brought up living in old buildings like the one that my father worked for the royal family. And so here it was St. James's Palace, which has been there since the 14th century. So a lot of dead people walking around. I was in complete awe. Did I feel traumatized? Never, because there was an angel here and an angel here. This was Michael and this was my guardian that conducted me. But of course, for all of the people around me, my caregivers or caretakers, whether they be my extraordinary mother, my father was deeply troubled by this, and all of my teachers beat me into doing and to move away from the being of it, because you look like a wandering Jew or something. Up to that point, Jewish people were wonderful people, but suddenly the wonder was captured.
Yeah.
And I then decided, okay, the best thing to do is to shut up. So I self-muted for about 2 years, and that got me still and grounded, and I became aware of my 3D body. And then the door opened, but I didn't need to speak. Do you see? I feel that if we can recognize that feeling is the language of the soul, it opens up the metaphoric consciousness, which all of our forebears and all of the people that you've worked with and I've worked with who are living indigenously, that they have these doors open all the time and converse with their ancestors or with the spirit people. And we've sort of closed off from that potentiality. And the more of us can get back into feeling the wonder, the awe, the delight, the serenity, the bliss, the absolute boundless joy, and the light filling our bodies, that we're going to provide supernatural healing. We're recording this, ladies and gentlemen, in mid-June 2025. And what if we go a little bit further in that direction, east, the Middle East, there is the potentiality of the Third World War. I don't say that to scare anybody, but the more we move into this space of wonder, it feels to me that the spirit world will provide supernatural aid where those who are aggressed by the trauma, they must be in deep trauma, otherwise why would they perpetrate such horrors? That they become aware of this space, because we all have it inherently within us. It's part of our toolkit. It's our soul. That suddenly, as that knife is going in, or that gun is being, or that finger is on the button, that suddenly there is this stillness where time stands still. It becomes, space-time continuum distorts, and what am I doing? Yeah. I had an experience some time ago, because I had this big project, which is that I spent 2 years working with Diana, which were the last 2 years of her life, Princess Diana. Wow. And we became very, very, very close. So when she passed, it was really difficult. However, I met the priest that was called to be with her during 6 hours, 7 hours of vigil through the night before Prince Charles arrived with the royal party, and then she was dispatched, and the coffin was covered in an ensign, and she was put on a plane and flown back. And the stories really synthesize it, so it's really short, but I feel you'll appreciate it, and it will illuminate a number of the things that we're sharing. The priest that was called wasn't supposed to be there. He was a Roman Catholic Jesuit priest, and of course she was an Anglican or an Episcopalian. She wasn't a Roman Catholic. But the priest that could have been there, for some reason, didn't turn up. Magic. In other words, whomever, the officials at the hospital, called the British ambassador at St. George's, Paris, and said, "Do you have a priest handy?" Well, they couldn't find a priest, so that's why they called the Jesuit. And he walked into the hospital to give the last rites in interminable judgment about this stupid young woman who had spent all of her time frittering away irresponsibly what she could have been doing. He was in total judgment of her. And as he rose in the elevator to the floor where her body was, in this special room, because the whole of the floor had been cordoned off because of security, he was reading Le Monde. Somebody just gave it to him as he walked into the elevator. "You may need this," in French, whatever that is. And he started reading this short article, and the whole of his consciousness began to change in attitude towards Diana, realizing that she wasn't the frivolous, absurd, thick as two short planks, all of that neurotic criticism that she was, because she was far from that. She was immensely intelligent, but of course it was an empathic intelligence. As he walked into the room, he was in tears, and he sat with her body, guarding it, supposedly doing the last rites, taking himself, or being taken through, renunciation for all of his sins. Now, I wanted to share that story. Obviously, I'm making it really short because it's packed.
Well, this is fascinating. Because let me make a comment. I had never heard any of this before. Interestingly enough.
Well, that story is actually, I was supposed to put it into a book, but the book hasn't been written yet. So it's a very special story, but it's also sacrosanct. So yeah. Notice I'm not mentioning his name because it needs to be, and I'll speak later about why. And it's to do with the healing of the trauma within the collective, because when she passed and we heard, millions of people, billions of people went,
yeah.
that in-breath of shock, the startle reflex, and they haven't breathed out yet.
Yeah.
That's why I wrote the book. One of the major reasons why I wrote the book. And we're not ready to receive that. However, I'll share the rest with you later. You were going to. I want you to interrupt.
Yes, I would be very interested in talking or learning what that Jesuit priest experienced, and I have a hypothesis, and that is, as he was sitting with Diana, as I said to you before, there are these life reviews. In the shared death experience, there are 3 types of life reviews. Mm-hmm. There is the life review, and this is all from the experiencer perspective, the SDE experiencer. They see the person's life who's dying. They see it, they feel it, and they typically come away with a greater appreciation for the meaning and purpose of their life, and there you have that. They also can see a life review where it's 2 of them together. The 2 of them go through their life together, and they see their relationship evolve, and the challenges, the healing, the love, the gratitude, etc. And there is a 3rd type of life review, and this is the one I would query about the Jesuit priest, where the experiencer has their own life review.
Yeah. Yeah.
In that veil opening, they are healed, but they're healed in a way that doesn't make sense for the Western mind, particularly those steeped in more Western, modern, if you will, Judeo-Christian traditions. In other words, it has nothing to do with judgment. It has everything to do with something that sounds like this.
Yeah. Well, that's why I use the codes of renunciation, you see, because we're dealing with a Jesuit priest.
Yeah.
And therefore his discipline as a Jesuit had been through rites of passage that are the divine sacraments. And of course, one of them is the divine sacrament of divine unction, which is the laying on of oil at the end.
Yeah.
The point he didn't get to the practicability of what that was all about. He was actually going through his own, and I didn't mention life review, I just used the word renunciation, because I feel that that's what a life review is, where we renounce our sins. I mean, the word sin, of course, we know means miss the mark, and it's actually an archery term, rather than the sin, I'm going to be punished by God, which is very Judeo. Because of the all-fearing God of Jehovah. But yeah, and unfortunately, we come to the end of our time together. But I feel that we have a second dialogue, which is to extrapolate on all of these points. And what I want to entice the viewer, the listener, and hopefully yourself. One of the things I'd love to share with you also is my experience of working with Alzheimer's. Because it is a form of dying, but they're still alive. And I'd love, because when I was invited years ago to work in a care home, a hospice, really, for the Alzheimer's, I worked with a group of 20 people who were completely out of their bodies. And I experienced something metaphysically as I chanted, because I was employed to use sound, but I'm not a musician. I'm a speaker who uses chant. So I chanted, firstly I started with the Om, and they moved through these extraordinary experiences. And then I started using Om Namah Shivaya and also the Gayatri, and the room became packed full of the heavenly host. And then I realized, but I won't share it now. I'll share it with you later, and then we'll open up. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd love you to come back on at some point, maybe before. Yeah. Can take it a stage further to entice the listeners into the fundament I feel about what you're sharing. You see, you stir me very deeply, and suddenly all of these experiences are coming up through my own witness of this remarkable space, this hallowed space that you're dealing with constantly, consistently.
Yeah.
Was there anything you wanted? I want you to talk about projects, because I know you've mentioned the film, but it's probably, is it too premature to talk about that?
No, I can talk about that. I just want to make one comment about the priest that the Jesuit priest, and that is, I have a feeling that he saw and experienced something that transformed him and healed him and awakened him in that moment. And I that can happen with any death. But I dare say, with the power of Lady Diana and what she held for the human collective, that this was it had an energetic punch in it.
Oh, I mean, it goes all the way back to the Christos, and I'll share with you later.
Yeah,
I mean, I was really, really short with the story because I wanted to get back to hearing what you have to say. So we'll share that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, the room was full because, remember, the Spencer family are part of the oldest noble family living on this planet. They're much more noble than the Windsors.
Mm.
And the ancestry goes back, all the way back to the Merovingians. And that's a whole story in itself.
Yeah.
Because remember, where she died in Roman times was the Temple of Diana.
Wow.
And it's called the Bridge of Souls for a reason. So that can be a cliffhanger for our next
time. Boy, that's a big cliffhanger. I want to hear more. But
by the way, I put into my book, Diana, the Voice of Change, if anybody wants to get it, which is, I'll just reach for it. It's just here. It's all there because I had to explore the metaphysical reason for her dying, to give succor to those who are traumatized. So that if there was a reason from a rational point of view, and the reasons are all immensely metaphysical. Yeah. Hey, this has been amazing. I'm so switched on.
Yeah.
I feel that we have many spirits around us. So the film.
Yes, the film. So we're doing a feature-length film right now. We're actually begun the production part of it. As you know, films take a while. So I tell your viewers, it's probably a year to 2 years off. But if you're interested, we at sharedcrossing.com, we will begin to, talk about the film. We also have programs, because one of the big things that people ask is, how do I learn more about the shadow death experience? Certainly there's my book, At Heaven's Door. There's also programs on our website, transformation.
Right. Could you put up the website for William, please, on the screen so that people can get it? Lovely. No, that's not it.
That's a different one.
It's
sharedcrossing.com.
That's interesting.
And I think as we do a run up to this film, I think there'll be a lot of good events. We've done a short film called Suffering into Gold. It's about a couple that chose medical aid in dying, and I trained the loved ones to have an SDE, and the wife and the sister of the gentleman who died had an SDE. And so you can we're going to start showing the different ways and very creative manners how these experiences express themselves and how the experiencers experience them and make sense of them. Because integration, and this is a word we should talk about in our next interview, and that is, integration is the most important part about having any spiritual experience. Spiritual experiences are happening all the time. It's what you do with them, and that's the doing part. How do you process it? How do you make that experience the fabric of your life? How do you live from those experiences and not from the mundane, concrete world that we live in? And that we talk about that. So
beautiful. What is known in Roman Catholicism or within Christian mysticism as post mortis, and how it's a discipline in itself. I suppose the nearest parallel is moving into the discipline and devotion of the Bardo in Tibetan Buddhism, which lasts for 44 days, that the spirit hangs around for that period of time. It is believed within Tibetan Buddhism. Amazing conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've been thrilled by our sharing. I know that I can hardly sit still. It's just so, you're a wonderful, wonderful man. And as I said before we came into conversation publicly, I feel that what you're doing is so noble. But evidently, you've shared with us some of the factors of how far-reaching and how visionary the entire process is to awaken people's consciousness to some of the simplicities that we've touched into, as well as the amazing macro complexity of how we're all deciding that we're multidimensional beings. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. And for this man, give him a great namaste, namaste. Ryan, thank you so much. William, do stay there.